Hello again, and welcome to the Peek into the Past section of our videos. We are going to look back in America in 1774. When Felicity was a young girl, she lived in Virginia, one of the 50 states in the United States of America today. Back in 1774, Virginia was one of the 13 colonies of England. A colony is a group of people who settle in a new land but follow a different country's laws. People came to the colonies so that they could have a better life, their own land, or worship freely. But the English were not the first to settle in America, because Native Americans had lived in America for at least 15,000 years. When Felicity was a young girl, most Virginia families lived on farms, but some lived in towns like Williamsburg. If you had walked down a street in Williamsburg, you would have seen a town buzzing with activity. Farmers came to town to sell their goods. Visitors came to see the latest English entertainments and fashions from Europe. Merchants came to do business. People who lived in the country came to shop at stores like Mr. Merriman's. During Felicity's time, people liked things to be elegant and graceful and orderly. Colonists built homes that balanced, often with the same number of windows to the left and to the right of the front door. Gardens were also orderly, with flowers and fruit trees and vegetables arranged in beautiful patterns. People's clothes showed how rich they were. Wealthy gentlemen wore velvet and silk suits with fancy trims. They wore pants called breeches that stopped at the knee, with silk stockings below. Gentlemen also wore wigs that were powdered, braided, and decorated with ribbons. Young boys, like Felicity's brother William, wore loose dresses until the age of 4 or 5, and then dressed like their fathers. Wealthy women wore long gowns made of many yards of fine fabric and lace. Under these gowns, they wore simple cotton shifts and stays that fitted tightly around their bodies to give a fashionable figure. Girls dressed like small copies of their mothers and wore stays from the time they were very young. People who were not so wealthy wore simpler clothes made from a plainer material. Dining was an art in the colonial Virginia. Colonists took pride in setting an elegant table with grand centerpiece. Virginia colonists loved to make visitors feel welcome with a beautifully set table. Dinner served in the afternoon consisted of at least 2 courses and sometimes lasted for many hours. There might be crabs and oysters from the Chesapeake Bay, several kinds of meat, fruits, breads, vegetables of every kind, and for dessert, fancy cakes, puddings, and tarts. But not everyone in Williamsburg had fine food, elegant clothing, and beautiful homes. Half of the people who lived in the town were African American slaves like Marcus. They were forced to work long and hard for the person who owned them. They got little in return except basic food, clothing, and shelter. An apprentice like Ben lived with a family for several years to work and learn a skill. However, an apprentice had hope of a good life when the apprenticeship was over, and he went out into the world to work on his own. Today you can visit the town where Felicity grew up and see many of the buildings that were lived in long ago. Colonial Williamsburg is a living history museum, open to visitors all year. You can taste colonial food and listen to music played on the colonial instruments. You can see people dressed in colonial clothes and shop in colonial stores. You can pretend that you are Felicity, living in the colony of Virginia more than 200 years ago.